following views and opinions are based on my time and experience as community coordinator at Wargaming North America for World of Warships. Information and opinions may have changed since this video was recorded. No NDA information is contained within this video. A lot of California offices are moving to Texas because economically it made more sense. The thing about condensing the Wargaming office is that the Wargaming office got a brand new office here, all completely renovated, all really nice and all that good stuff. And there's room for that team to actually grow and develop into that space, whereas the old office was a bit eh. Yes and no, in my opinion. Naturally, every game cares about community because community is what keeps the light on. The issue that I find is that the studio does not care for regional communities. And this is something like Radar X, Cam if he's still here, and I face time and time again, is we tried multiple times to explain how an American audience differs from a European audience, how an American audience differs from a Russian audience. And it was something that just wasn't ever really listened to, understood, or really kind of cared for. So you have your regional teams who honestly probably, care the most about the communities that do not receive any sort of support and engagement driving from the developers. Some of the people in St. Pete's, you'd be like, hey, we want to do this because, it's going to support this part of our core audience. This is how we thought it through. This is how we want to engage it. And to kind of just get crickets back or not really anything. One v one. Yeah, everyone, when 1v1 was conceived, the amount of, oh, that's never going to work, that is stupid, why would you even do that, that came prior to 1v1 being released was massive. But everyone loved it. And it was really, really fun. What I would love to see, right, is, I pitched this before while I was still at Wargame. I pitched it a few times, actually, was a 1v1 league. So instead of having your typical ranking, you rank out system, you make it a league. When you win a game, you gain a point. If you lose a game, you lose a point. If you draw, it's no point change sort of thing. And then it ends up creating a ranking board of all the players. So then, you can't blame it on a teammate for doing badly. You're at your own mercy. I thought that would be really freaking fun. And yes, there's ways to farm it. You could, put those sorts of detection systems, or you window it. But essentially, you 1v1 it and have a 1v1 league for a weekend or something. I thought that shit would be fun AF. Or put more gimmicky game modes in, freaking make a torpedo beats generator game. Make a torpedo jousting mode. That sort of stuff would be hella fun. And it would be the sort of thing you can turn it on for a week or two. And then turn it off again, just to add a little bit of diversity. But essentially, just every now and again, if you look at some of the most engaging World of Warships official streams, is when they're doing stupid shit like Mikasa secondary only battles in the training room or torpedo jousting. You put a few of those modes on rotation so people can just try some of the kind of community games. Would be a hoot. But yeah, 1v1s was definitely the reaction I wasn't expecting. So how that sort of stuff worked is, typically speaking, unless it was a collaborative something, whatever it was, stream, tournament, event, in-game thing, whatnot, the day-to-day was very, very separate. Typically speaking, if there was a massive shitstorm on the horizon, we all knew it was going to be on the horizon, or we could all see it coming from a week or two out. In which case, it would be a case of, hey, us telling the developers, hey, we're worried about this for this reason. Do you have any comment, feedback, whatnot on it? Or can we, this is the concerns we think the player base is going to raise. We got actually pretty good at predicting what you guys would complain about at one point. First squad of Monty with CAC. Ooh, yes. That was a fun time. We got usually pretty good at predicting what you guys would complain about, which is a really good sign of good community teams. And then it would be a case of whether we got the responses back from the developers. Sometimes we knew what the responses were and they just had to be written out by us. Sometimes it was things that were we don't know. Great example of that was freaking Puerto Rico, when we were like, hey, X, Y, and Z is going to hit the proverbial fan. How would you like us to respond to this? And then I remember St. Petersburg released something on like Reddit or something, and we didn't get told about it. I don't remember being told about it in advance. I could be wrong on that. I wouldn't quote me on that one. And we got, and then we didn't have any information the first time that when the shitstorm started, and then they came up with that, which created more of a shitstorm. And we got no messaging again, so we were all kind of just sitting there going, oh crap. Typically between the EU and the NA teams, for example, unless there was a collaborative event or like working on an idea to celebrate something like the 24-hour charity stream or like King of the Sea sort of stuff, and in which case, yes, we would collaborate for those. If we had an idea for like a weekend event or something, like the perfect opportunity was one of the events I designed for Australia Day. Like we'd offer it to the other regions and stuff like that. And if they wanted to, they'd pick it up. But yeah, beyond that, like, unless there were smaller bits and pieces, there was communication, but not like on, oh, we have players saying X or we have players saying Y, because that sort of conversations just wasn't needed at that level. SuperTest is another great example of a program that has a lot of potential, a lot of free resource for wargaming that isn't being utilized very, very well. Now, in saying that, not everything that a player suggests is ever going to make it into the game. I'm going to be quite frank. Players don't know what's best for the game 7 times out of 10. Balance ideas, they usually can only consider like cause and effect. So if I increase the reload speed of the Moskva, just because I'm looking at the Moskva, that's going to make the Moskva a lot more comfortable to play. But they aren't considering the knock-on effect of what that will do to other ships kind of... That one's a hard one to go into because everyone's always going to know who you're talking about in those scenarios. Is there room for improvement? Definitely. Is it bad? No. Yeah, like I said, I think there is room for improvement. Do I think it's terrible? No. I think, everything always has room for improvement, and that is very much the case in this instance. I think we looked into it at one point. I think they were planning to just before I left, and it just didn't quite get done before I left. But I think they looked into it and they saw no correlation between people playing the ships of their quote-unquote home nations. I don't think there was any trends between Americans buying USN versus like Germans buying Soviet 6. Yes, there is. Lots of internal communications. Everyone's always talking, emails, whatnot. They go through the GPI team, which is headed by Viserys, I think his name is. No, it's not Viserys. It's something similar to that, though. But yes, no, there is comms lines. You can definitely ask questions. Bit of a joke about asking questions, though, is like, you have to make sure that the answer to your question is not anywhere before you ask it. They don't like answering questions twice. Not sure I understand that question, considering the community from testing stage 1, minus the internal technical tests, community has been involved in submarine testing since the start. They had to do it slowly to make sure they didn't overload the servers. But they've been involved for a while, so I'm not sure I understand that question. And that leads you into like the stuff with the CC drama that I've heard of, seen of lately. In terms of you have Russian developers, Russian people leading that program nowadays, responding to Americans in this particular situation. That was, is why Volga left, why Ashley left, why Citizen was talking about when he got kicked, that they're not respectful of it. No, it's the Russian way or the highway. I don't think they care. Look, someone sends you a message, just block him. And again, Woody, I'm not saying that wargaming is perfect in that regards. I do think in the last, let's say, like I said, 2018 to 2019, they were better about it, particularly over the CV rework. It was messy, I'm not going to deny that. But by the end of it, they're taking on player feedback and taking on, hey, this is broken, fix it, was getting better. Honestly, like, the thing about people complaining on the forums is it was usually just down to not knowing enough. Whether, like, they misunderstood a concept, they misunderstood a promotion or something, honestly, like dealing on the forums 24 times out of 25 was fine because it was just people misunderstanding this, that, or the other. So correcting those is actually really, really simple. Every now and again, you got someone who just wanted to complain for the sake of complaining. Those ones were the worst, where you'd give them the information, you'd correct them on some points, you'd concede some points, yada yada. But they kind of stuck to their guns on whatever they're complaining about. Those ones were rough, but as a whole, like, the forums weren't that bad. The DMs were something else. Here's a funny story. I can tell you guys this one because this is not an NDA related issue or anything along those lines. This one was like, honestly, the funniest and the biggest WTF. So this one person was like excessively bumping a thread, and I PM'd it. I left a thing in the post, and I was like, hey, you know, please don't excessively bump your threads. You know, every 24 hours is acceptable for this category. And he turned around and he said, excessively means Webster Merriam definition of excessively, of which this is not. So, ... enter, bump. Okay. Hits him with like a base suspension, which is like 24 hours or something back in the day. Sends me a PM. You're a blah, 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 blah. Insert not very nice words here, etc. All right, well, you're now insulting staff and complaining about moderation. Here's I think it was like a 3 days, the next one. He then went and said a very similar thing on back when the website articles had comments in them. He went and said something very, very similar. So at that point, we say, screw it. You are now insulting a wargaming staff and circumventing your ban. So we essentially, I think we perma-banned him at that point because it was all within 1 day. Then guess what? Homeboy came and he emailed me on my personal email for my streaming stuff. He's like, you're a little, you know, F-word, all this stuff about being an immigrant and all this really racist and like just really inappropriate shit. He starts emailing me. All over me being like, hey buddy, can you not excessively bump your threads? It's, as per the rules, it's 1 per 24 hours. Still to this day, he will periodically email me. And I'm like, all right, how you doing today, buddy? Like, he just went off his rocker. I just remembered one. So I got tasked with Shipstorm for a certain season. I can't remember which one it was. It was a recent one. Happy to help out on it. It was one of the first things because typically Cammy did tournaments because that was more up his alley since he was more of our competitive dude than what I was. And it's all flooding back to me now is what it feels like. So I pitched it. You know, I did a standard tournament write-up in terms of making sure we had approval for prizes and bits and pieces. And turn around and say, yeah, we don't want to do this because it looks too much like clan brawls. And I was like, what? Yeah, something like that. I don't know. It hasn't been done before, so it's hard to say definitively one way or another, like, hey, at what point are you going to see impact? iEarlGrey is on the same boat as I. Granted, iEarlGrey wanted to kind of kick up a stink when he left. I decided not to. Trust me, I could have gone out in a similar fashion had I chose to, but the difference being is, since I was more involved with the community than what he was predominantly CCs, is that I had that attachment to the community, so I didn't want to go that route. I didn't want to piss off the community on the way out. So the thing about Nico is, that was when the San Francisco office closed. And to my understanding, I could be wrong. I don't think I am, though. He could have taken the job and moved with Austin, but he decided not to. He decided not to come to Austin because his partner, now wife, has job and all that stuff. So the thing about using PR people are great for addressing concerns in terms of, hey, this is how you should probably write this communication for it to come off correctly. This comes back to, hey, you know, there are cultural differences between communities, something we tried to express to the development team for a very, very long time when we were completely and utterly dismissed every time we did it. While you can have a PR person write something, it doesn't hold weight. It came across as like, there's many places on the forums and Reddit where it's like, oh, you know, this person is just towing the company line. That's what it comes across as. Now, when you have people like some of the communications around Puerto Rico that came out that were like, oof, 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 you don't say that stuff. it comes down to that cultural differences. A lot of stuff I've seen written, I turn around and went, you know, if they phrased that differently or they wrote that differently, it wouldn't have come across that badly. I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but this is stuff we talked to them about multiple times. That, like, the amount of times that over Christmas that the Puerto Rico communications came out and stuff like that. First of all, they all came out usually like overnight when the NA office was asleep, for one. But the amount of times we were like, hey, if we had had any sort of chance to review this to a certain degree, we could have told you that this is a train wreck waiting to happen. Give us a second to fix the verbiage in it so that it doesn't read as bad as what it does, and you're gonna get a much better response. You know, that sort of stuff was never listened to because the developers know best. And I think this comes back to my concern in that I feel like there is a few people within the development team that are so heavily entrenched in the company that they're not willing to let go of control, or they're not willing to say, oh, maybe this person could have done this better. Now, I'll admit, like, one opportunity I was given that, I was given that opportunity one time. It was a closed communication, so it was a communication between two people. I was told, hey, these are the points you want to cover. If you want to do it, go for it. And I fucked it up. Like, I'll be honest. I did not do a good job with that, and yeah, my bad. It was a bad decision on my part, and it is what it is. I think there was some internal reasons why I decided to go the route I did. I essentially did an iEarlGrey, but I did it on a much smaller level, or a much more incognito level. So I think the issue when it comes to feedback is that I'm gonna be really frank here, guys. The players don't always know what is best. Now, I'm not saying that in every single case. A good example of this is, you know, Graf Zeppelin original. Like, I'm not saying that Wargaming didn't screw that one up in itself too, but the player base definitely didn't make it any better. So what I think is you've kind of got there is you've ended up with a perpetuating cycle of, you know, Wargaming does something the player base doesn't like. The player base tries to quote unquote provide suggestions and whatnot. Wargaming has tried to listen to them. Neither side trusts each other, which is really, really unfortunate. Wargaming has a vision for the game, which, you know, every developer needs. Again, guys, this is not meant to be a let's bitch on Wargaming stream. Like, I'm just being frank and factual on this in terms of my opinions and what I think. Wargaming has a vision for the game, and they have to consider every aspect of the game. 9 times out of 10, when players are like, I want this fixed, quote unquote fixed, I don't like this, this is how I want to fix it, players don't consider the knock-on effects of nerfing something, buffing something, adding something, removing something, which obviously Wargaming is a little bit more insightful for. But while Wargaming does have that going for them, on the flip side is I do feel like there is some complacency and there is some stubbornness, and again, opinion, within the development team that maybe from tenure, it may just be a personality thing. Don't really like it's too hard to narrow it down to one specific thing. But I do feel like there is some resistance in there for wanting to make and do changes, or at least being willing to try stuff. Now, credit given where credit due is, you know, Wargaming has done better at learning, at least over the last, I would say from like 2018 to 2019, end of. I know that was CV rework time, but I do actually think that was a golden period for Wargaming learning how to listen to the community better and respond better to the community. We'll cut that off just before Puerto Rico. Nope, I don't think they'll do that. Because if they did that, people would stop spending money. That one's hard because Reddit, you had your players that actually kind of had a good idea of what they were talking about a lot of the time, which means if you actually provided them valuable or like valid data or valid information, they were actually really receptive to you and understanding. The ones in the forums were a little bit more irrational in terms of complaining about the most random shit possible, but those questions are usually typically a lot easier to handle, which is where you kind of got into mob mentality, where someone would pick a subject to complain about and then everyone would just kind of jump on the bandwagon. But since it's mostly a one-way conversation, they were usually pretty easy to deal with. There wasn't a lot of, like, there's not a lot of difference. Each had their pros and cons. yeah, the game does have very strong monetization. You can find it publicly if you know where to look. The comparison of free-to-play games and the average spend per user. Wargaming is very, very well off there. That was not a great game. Once you've got a very solid monetization pattern and plan and system, in my opinion, it gives you a lot more freedom to pull away and focus more on community. In terms of, if you've got a system that works, that has, you know, proven for months on end that, hey, revenue is going to remain consistent, give or take. Obviously, there's fluctuations with, COVID. I don't know how that would have impacted them. I don't know. I don't think it necessarily makes them complacent. Honestly, I feel like it gives you more freedom to fiddle around with things and try new things. So what I would say with iEarlGrey, I have known Earl for a long time. He is an absolutely lovely person. And I'll say the same. There are certain people who you look at in the WoW's community and you think, God, that person is a dick. But when you get them and they're not talking about warships, are an absolutely lovely person. Great example of that is like Flamu. Flamu is an absolutely lovely person, but he's, when he gets deep into warship stuff, he's a little bit hard to handle and it's hard to keep up with him. He's passionate about it, good for him. So I'd like to say that, I think IL is a great person, that I think he got burned. He got burned by wargaming. He lost his love for the game. He lost his love for the community. He, got completely and utterly burnt out. And he decided to essentially cause it. He trashed the hotel room before he left, is what I equate it to. I'm not saying everything he did was right, but being in a position of knowledge, I know why he did the things he did. It's not my place to share. I'm not going to because of that. But I would encourage you guys to consider there's probably more going on than what you guys realize. I could have trashed the hotel room on my way out. I decided not to. But, he is a good guy deep inside that, just got burnt and took it out on the community on the way out. It happens. Not saying it's the best way to do it, but it happens. He's a good guy.